give me one moment. Yeah, over to you, Robert.
Okay, hello everyone. So should I share my screen as well? Yeah, I think it would be a good idea. So Vijesh, you started recording, right?
Yep.
Okay, and you see my slides?
Yes, I do. I will be concentrating on getting people in and answering all their queries if on the chat system, right? So
Awesome.
I'll be here.
Yes, guys, feel free to type your questions in the chat
Please
as we go, and we will voice it out to Robert. And Robert, you can tell how you'd like our audiences to connect with you as well. Over to you.
Yeah, I appreciate if people put their comments as we go. I won't be able to sidetrack to the chat box, so I'll trust Vijesh will have a look and tell me if there's something that you want me to stop or anything.
Definitely.
Okay, shall we begin? So this is Leadership Through Alignment, and I'll talk about it in a second. My name is Robert Saeg. I'm the founder of a new consultancy called Go Viable. I established it this year. Sorry. So I provide coaching and advisory services on planning and productivity to leaders, innovators, and teams developing products in general. Although my sweetest spot is medical device, which I've been doing 15 years now. My aim is to create successful products and a successful business, and effectively reducing time to market as a tangible outcome, if you want. As I just kindly mentioned, I've been developing products since '93. I started my career as a software engineer with Intel, and worked with big companies and startups as well. And over the years, I've been engineer, manager, and everything in between, if you want, and pushed over 30 products to the market. And maybe it wouldn't shock you, but one observation I got through the years is that when products are developed right, they were successful, actually. They brought value to the market, the users loved them, and more importantly, the teams developing them felt proud about their achievements and created rapport in their organizations. And from that experience, I want to talk today about leadership through alignment. So, I mean, communication and alignment is a big subject, and you can take it to the psychological domain or behavioral domain. What I want to talk today is about impact. And basically how teams shouldn't just trust and agree with each other, but how can you bring teams to endorse each other's views and work from that perspective. So I'm going to talk about the leadership role through the communication lens, and hopefully give you some new perspectives to the complexity of product development when communication is ignored. Together we'll observe some disruptive approaches in that regard, and at the end I'll try and give some guidelines of how it can work. Okay, you've probably seen this, I hope. It's been circulating since 60s, 70s, no one really knows. And I've been lucky as an engineer to see it early in the 90s in the offices of all kinds of people I worked with. It started like as a joke cartoon of what the marketing guys said should happen, and how it was actually provisioned, and then what actually was done, and how it was installed in the field versus what the user actually really had in mind. One of those cartoons was published with this subtitle: "Communication means saying and hearing the same message." And they were just trying to say it's all about communication, because the misalignment here basically is what caused all those griefs between the different departments. So before we start, I want to talk a bit about the brutal realities of projects throughout the years. And these are consistent numbers through decades, really. I've been watching these since the early 90s, and even looking at statistics from before. Although these researches are fairly new. One is that IT projects overrun by 27%, and less than 1 in 4 projects finish within the expectations of budget, time, and what it was supposed to do in the first place. Now, this might not seem too much if you want, but this is how it translates to money. This is from the PMI Pulse report 2 years ago. $2 trillion are wasted a year on project deviations and failures. That's a huge number on just, this is waste, basically. And maybe I think, sorry, one of the fascinating numbers about that could give a glimpse, why is this happening? This is a big research done by Jenica by actually interviewing executives. They went and interviewed over 600 executives in the IT industry. And they came to the conclusion that 75%, 3 out of 4, did not really trust the plans they approved. So whatever happens in that organizations, the project sponsor said, yep, go, we have a plan, but they really didn't believe in it. So they basically set it to failure right before it started. So this is the world we live in. And I think the problem with this is that people, engineers, managers, everyone, start to believe that this is the reality of it and there's nothing to do about it, which is not true, to be honest. And I'll talk about it in a second. So my approach to look at communication and how it affects the waste we just talked about is through how broad is the communication within the organization and then how deep it goes. So the connectedness line, if you want, is how connected are the teams? Are they talking to each other enough? And then the congruence is if they are talking to each other or not, how deep the conversation goes. So, and this is kind of a model, if you want, that I built from my observation through the years. So the teams that don't really talk to each other and don't talk deeply to each other, I call selfish islands. Just everyone to themselves, everyone thinks they're the best shot and they'll just do what they know. And usually you'll find this in underperforming teams. And I'll talk about it a bit in a second as well. What I find fascinating about these teams is that they are usually optimistic, simply because they don't know what they don't know. They think they know it all, together and in silo. And they end up being optimistic about, yeah, we'll finish this next month. I can get you something working tomorrow. You'll always hear solutions, and then when it comes to reality, you see that they miss the deadline again, or they overwork in the weekend just to make it happen because they promised, and that's the good case. And then you have organizations that say, okay, we need to put structure, we need to adopt something, maybe agile, for example, but without really understanding their values, the importance of communication. Usually I call them imitators because they just copy paste something into their organization and say, okay, this should work. But it ends up being bureaucratic, basically, because it's what I call process over people in that regard. And I'll give examples as we go in a second. And then you have, like, and I worked in many of these organizations which I call deep silos. So it's not really selfish islands, it's not really bureaucratic. There's quite an improvement. For example, you'll see matrix structures there, where there's a project manager working with lots of engineers from different departments. Each engineer has their own team and their own manager, but there's like cross management functions, so they can focus on the project and not just on their team. What happens usually, and one good aspect about such organizations, that they allow free communication so that people can discuss, for example, things before everyone signs on the agreement. So the technical team will talk to the marketing team and they will say, okay, we understand you roughly, and this is roughly the timeline, and this is what we're gonna do. What happens when problems start to occur is that because everyone is still not really fully immersed with each other, when problems occur, everyone starts to say, okay, but that was informal discussion. The formal discussion said, like a lawyer now, 1, 2, 3, and this is what I'm going to stick to. It doesn't matter what we discussed before. And with time, this cripples the collaboration, and people, it just creates long and deep disputes, if you want, between departments or between engineers and managers or between all kinds of levels in the organization. And then there's what I call immersed alignment teams, or some call them champion teams, that really work effectively together and work efficiently together. And they are focused on finding problem solution fit. And I think one of the markers of such champion teams is what I mentioned earlier, that they understand each other, they agree with each other, but they also endorse each other. You could find a project manager on the technical team explaining to their team what the marketing guy meant. And it's true. They don't need to pull the marketing guy every time there's a dispute. And they don't need to dispute with the marketing guy every time there's a problem. They understand each other, they work with each other. And usually this happens because they have seen the same picture. They've seen the same elephant, if you want. I had the pleasure and chance to, for example, as a technical team lead, go with a marketing person and the program or sponsor, if you want, and go on a tour with the clients to get first-hand impressions. So when everyone took their notes, they took their notes for the marketing side, I took my notes for the technical side, the sponsor took their notes for the business side. And when we put the plan, everyone was aligned. We were solving the same problem, if you want. So there wasn't much room for disputes. If there was a dispute, it was about how, not about why, for example. And this is where you get the least amount of waste, if you want. I can keep running, but if something appears on the chat box or there's a question here, I can happily talk about it. You know what?
I'm keeping an eye on it. Sorry.
That's all right.
I'm just keeping an eye on it. So
here. So on that tour, for example, it was a medical device, a matter of fact. So we were visiting hospitals and I was talking to nurses that were using the old application that we wanted to make a new one after 15 years in the market. And this was early 2010, 2009. Those nurses, all 5 of them that I talked with from 5 different institutions, mentioned that they hate the mouse. And specifically, they hate the right click on the mouse. So, you know, this dream of software engineers to just chuck everything out in that context menu with a right click mouse, it was just thrown out of the window. And just being there as the technical lead and could get that first-hand impression, I don't think anything could convey that in that intensity from someone else that is not technical, from the marketing team or from the project sponsor, that it doesn't matter what you create. If it's based on mouse, for example, then it's not good. If you just create nice GUI, it's not good. And we ended up actually creating for them like a cashier workflow software that even on a touch screen, basically. So we didn't really need the mouse at all. And that's where you start creating great products for your clients, obviously by understanding the clients and doing the user research, but also by aligning the communication and that understanding that it bubbles through the organization to everyone. Not just one person understand it, and then when it's translated to someone else, it becomes something entirely different. Like that 3 example we saw before. Okay, so when we talk about communication, I want to talk about values, beliefs, and attitudes. And I'm not going to go deep into it. I'm not a psychologist. This is just, you know, common knowledge. You can find it everywhere. But I think it's also important because values do affect beliefs, and beliefs in turn affect our attitudes, and that affects our behavior. For example, if my value is perfection or being the best, then I could, from that value, believe that I know better than others. And then my attitude would be that I'm intolerant to others that are not as good as me. And then on a behavioral level, I wouldn't listen enough. I would be talking more and interrupting others and, you know, being, pain in the butt in meetings. From that same value of wanting to be the best, if my belief is that I believe in the power of collaboration and that everyone deserves a chance to learn and thrive, then my attitude would be more compassionate. And then my behavior in meetings, for example, will be about tolerance and listening, or mentoring others if I find that I know more than them, for example. So from the same set of values, you could have different beliefs that affect different attitudes that then eventually affect different behaviors. So you've been silent. I think I'll give you a small assignment here. I brought up the Agile Manifesto, which
Before,
I think
before
the audience here. Sorry?
Sorry, before we get there, Robert, there was a comment from Isabel. She mentioned that great matrix is equal to congruence and connectedness.
Pardon again?
Okay. Great matrix is equal to congruence and connectedness.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate
Isabel,
it.
do you want to elaborate more on that?
Sorry, just had to unmute first.
Sorry about that. I couldn't see your face.
Oh, okay. No, that's right. I should turn that on too. I think it's sometimes hard to capture concepts that are quite complex in simple matrices, because sometimes you run the risk of oversimplifying. And I really like that one because you could actually see the complexity, but still in a very structured way. So I thought it was worth a comment.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Certainly. Awesome. I'm glad you liked it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Isabel. So here's a question for you. Look at the Agile values now and try with what I've been babbling about now for 15 minutes, 20 minutes. See how many words in this manifesto are actually directly correlated to communication. And you can just check it in the chat box if you just think it's 1, 3, 0, all of them. Awesome. I mean, you have interactions, obviously individuals as well, but that's maybe not too direct if you want. Documentation is certainly a means of communication eventually, and at least that's what I believe when I work with teams. Collaboration, there you go. Negotiation. What else do you have? Responding to change. When you think about the manifesto, and it's really, communication is all over the place. And this is a grief I find in organizations that just, the bureaucratic, again, that just copy-paste Agile without even understanding that. I think the beauty of Agile is that it simplified the process of product development to how important communication is. And all the retrospectives and sprint planning and getting everyone in the same team, it's just making the communication easier and alignment more straightforward. And if that's missed, you just copy paste the process and the rituals, then you get like any stagnant religion, rituals without any deep understanding. Followers than real believers, if you want. Okay. So let's look about where things could go wrong. If you think about the communications you see in your environment on day-to-day basis, maybe you can quickly write something in the chat about things you see that you think or believe that they are really disruptive in order to do the technical work. I mean, eventually we think most of the time we're doing technical work as engineers or even as marketing or even as managers. Everyone in their technical domain, but still when things are disrupted, then the process isn't really smooth and doesn't flow properly. I'll just give you a minute to think about it. Okay, I see you need help, guys. So here are some examples. So you have the bureaucracy, right? My manager will talk to your manager. Who are you to talk to me in the first place? Doubts, where you often hear, oh, those guys or those managers or whatever, they don't know what they're doing in the other team usually, right? So you tell it to your good peers, but the bad peers shouldn't hear that. Jargon, fill the XYZ form before the blah blah meeting. And if you haven't been in the organization for 2-3 years, you cannot get a grip of what the hell are they talking about. Sorry about the language. The blame game, or the condescending game. Maybe you don't see it as condescending when you go to someone and they say, it works for me, it works on my computer. And they don't care less if it works for anyone else, or if they follow the process to put it on I don't know, the integration machine or whatever. Just dismissive.
We do have we do have some updates from the teams as well.
Okay, cool.
There's interruptions, not listening, politics,
Yes.
arrogance or lack of humility,
Yep.
generalizations like we always, they never, one
Yes.
way only, and
Yep.
yeah.
Awesome.
So we've got
one way only is like the last one I want to say, like, why would anyone do it some way else, right?
Yeah.
And then you have cynical responses and you have opinionated discussions. And I won't go, I was just talking to the Vishesh about the C versus C++ and then C# versus C++ and then Agile versus whatever. And I think one of the most disruptive ones that go deep, if they are not noticed, is praising outcome over effort. Like as if effort didn't count. And then you end up praising individuals that as if solved the problem, rather than praising processes and teams that put thought up front to prevent even those happening. Because if you prevent problems from happening, then in my opinion, that's worth praising. It's much more difficult to catch. It's usually easier to catch the superheroes that go and solve a problem, rather than the superheroes behind the scenes that make sure the problem doesn't even erupt in the first place. But this is like the superficial tip of the iceberg, really. If you think about it, what about the disruptive beliefs that cause such behaviors? If you want to give it a go for a minute.
I have in the meanwhile, Samira mentioning about working in change management. She agrees with this. If we don't create a space to listen, build trust, and have a great communication plan, projects tend to fall through. I have Sammy Cox mentioning defensive responses through fear of being wrong. And that's a very important point.
Thank you. Thank you, Sammy. This is awesome. And Samira, I mean, this brings to my mind those, those Western comedy movies where the leader is riding on their bike and suddenly they look behind and there's no one. I mean, just riding in the woods alone.
And Craig has provided an input saying, for the disruptive beliefs he's put in, and the best selfishness and egoistic. Brendan says, not feeling valued, distrust, not feeling supported.
Keep them coming. I mean, don't be shy about them. And I mean, this is far from an exhaustive list, unfortunately. And the more there is, the better. I'm just trying to put few to make a point and trigger things in your mind. So you come up with the ones you see in your environment, right? So please don't stop writing them down, or even if you're yourself at least, because this is about the observations around you, and we'll talk about it in a second. So some disruptive beliefs. I put the first one. I really find this too recurring, and it really makes me jump. The luck element of it. Many talk about bad luck when things go wrong, and others talk about good luck when things go good. And this really makes me sad many times, because a lot of people are doing a lot of amazing and good jobs. They really try to figure out how to solve problems, how to prevent problems. And just putting it on bad luck or good luck at the end is really an understatement, to say the least. And if that's the environment that managers live in or developers live in, they should change it as soon as possible. And I mean, this could be a great talk just alone on this sentence. Or you would hear people, for example, there's no good time for vacation, for example, because they are swamped all the time. So they believe that if they leave the office, everything will just crumble down and it will be a disaster. And yeah, one that was mentioned earlier in the chat box, keep your head down, don't suggest improvements. You might be wrong and be killed for it. This one comes a lot from managers about process. This is more in the bureaucratic sense. You see managers saying, oh, we will find a process that will fix the problems. Whenever there's a problem, did you fix the process? As if the process should lead everyone rather than process is a tool that helps everyone. And generally focusing on what I call what and how rather than why. I mean, when we ask why this process? Why this feature? Why this client? Why this plan? Why this deadline, you know? It's not just about questioning and being a disbeliever. It's about really trying to understand what drives the content. Actually, I have a nice slide about this. It was in the MVP. Okay, that's all right. And this then, oops, sorry. And this then leads to people that you see micromanaging others from these beliefs, or commitment to plan blindly from these beliefs, or what I mentioned earlier, champion individuals, not champion teams. I think maybe I'll just go back quickly to this slide. I missed something here and people didn't ask. It's these numbers in the middle you see. I don't know if you noticed them. The times 1 to more than times 20. This is a measure of waste if you want. And this is backed from different researches. One of them was the PMI Pulse 2018 that showed that champion teams versus underperforming teams, they, like if a champion team does an activity and they create some kind of waste, if you give the same activity to underperforming teams, they will be 20 times more worse. That's 2000%, guys. That's not 20%, that's not 200%, that's 2000%. And I think this is important to understand how disruptive miscommunication can be. Because we're talking about generating a huge amount of waste that, in my opinion, no process and no tool can fix. I don't think anyone telling you adopt Agile, for example, is going to tell you this will improve your life by 2000%. Or if someone tells you use, I don't know, JavaScripts and not Python, this will improve your life by 2000%. Actually, the research shows using good tools that you can control can improve your productivity by 30%. That's roughly the number, not 2000%. The deep success factors come when you have really good teams aligned, working together. They know what they're doing. They know why they are doing what they're doing. And that takes a lot of work. But when you do it right, you see the right results as well. Okay. So I think that was enough about problems. Let's talk a bit about good stuff. So just before I talk about this, I want to invite you to really observe things. And as I said, write them in the chat box, write them on a notebook now or tomorrow or whatever, or just be more aware when you work in your environment about these beliefs and these behaviors and approaches. And please don't accept that. If there's one thing I can tell you today, just don't accept this cognitive bias, if you want, that what is acceptable in a herd approach thing, that waste and deviation in projects are inevitable, that tools are, or processes are the missing element. They are crucial, they are important. But if you even go back to the Agile Manifesto I put before, it's really about people. It's really about having good teams and having good alignment between them, that they know what they're doing. And that's the first thing. And if that's not happening, first observe it, and then we'll see now how you can fix it as well. And maybe if I can mention now just one book that I've been reading recently in this regard. It's called Good to Great by Jim Collins. I think it's an awesome eye-opener book in that regard. He went and he researched with 20 researchers for over 5 years what distinguished great companies from good companies. And they took a measure of companies that are in the same level, and suddenly one of them shoots up to become 20 times, 10 times, 5 times better than anything else in the market, whereas before they were just good like anyone else. And what were the factors to drive them there? So it's a fascinating book. Okay, my approach, if you want, again, it's not in a XY shape this time. It's just the way when I work with teams. This guide, if you want, this is like a blueprint, a behind the scene recipe that I like to adopt. So I call it get it right and then plan it right, make it right, and then refine it right. So get it right is about making everyone is aligned. And this comes from the technical teams, the marketing teams, the business teams, everyone involved in creating this awesome creation, innovative creation that is called a product in a business. And then once everyone is aligned about what problem they're solving, they all agree that, yes, this is a problem we're solving as a team, then they can start planning it right and make sure they have effective plans that I like to call add confidence, not just tick the box exercises. And then they can start doing the right things first. And exactly that, after the plan, they can start making it happen. And then they can talk about productivity and tools and processes and agile and all that. Whereas usually when I start talking to teams, they are already at the make it right. They think they are doing the right thing. They are already implementing, or I have a prototype already, I can show it to you. But once we start going back to, did you get it right? Did you plan it right? Now let's see if you're making it right. And usually they can improve a lot by doing this kind of retrospective on the go, if you want. And once they're doing things right, then they can start actually refining and improving and putting KPIs and continuous improvement stuff. So this is, if you want, in a nutshell, the blueprint I like to work from. And I thought I'll give you just a quick example, and I'll correlate it with the myth of time and budget. Everyone loves to hear that things will be on time, on budget. And I touched on this in my last newsletter. I think maybe some of you read it. But I'm putting it as a case study, because I think many times teams, in the heat of the creation and the heat of the work, they just start to think about times and budget in terms of absolutes that couldn't or shouldn't be changed. And I'm not questioning this specific belief or approach. I'm just questioning the whole setup that creates it, really. Because plans are really arbitrary. Plans are created by people to communicate expectations, really, if you think about it. And if you take even like a small example of, let's have this meeting today as a workshop. So we set the time at 6 o'clock, we set the duration of 1 hour, and people were invited, and there's a speaker, myself, and there's all kinds of, there's Vishesh as a host, and all that. So that kind of a small project, if you want. It has time, it has budget, I have an amount of slide I want to carry on. But all this was created based on an expectation that people will come and learn about leadership through alignment and learn about certain things. This is the why. And this is the most important thing here. So if I have this plan, and then, I don't know, something happens. There's an, a force majeure, for example, and I cannot be here today. Then I will probably talk to Vishesh as soon as possible, not at 5:55, but probably yesterday at least, or better even a week ago, and saying, I see a problem with this time and I really have a problem doing it. Maybe we can change things. But then most of the problems in projects erupt when those plans are put at the beginning and no one really questions them. So the manager says, or a boss says, I want this product next year and this is the budget I have. And no one comes back and says, I heard you, that's okay, but this is what we really can do in this time frame, and this is what we really can do in this budget. And based on what I heard from you, these are the things we can focus on. Is this okay or not? Maybe they're not reasonable, and then, okay, that's a different discussion. But usually, I think when people start to see eye to eye, that's the negotiation dance, and that's where you add value to the plan rather than just, okay, I'll squeeze the plan just because you said so, and then start reporting deviations as you go. So at the minute the plan is born, it's really crucial that it's the right plan that everyone is agreeing upon. And again, it's just an agreement, like any contract, really. And then that's what I call the difference between deviation and change. Deviation usually happens out of a sudden. Suddenly there's a meeting, and suddenly in that meeting someone says, sorry, we know you wanted this next month, but it will actually be happening probably 2 months later. Or suddenly someone in a meeting says, we know the budget is X, but we've already consumed half of it and we're 25% through. That's a deviation. A change, on the other hand, is something that is orchestrated into that endless negotiation. A change happens out of the understanding. So as I mentioned earlier, if I talked a week ago to Vishesh and said, sorry, I know you already invited people, but I really cannot do this on this time or within that. And then we can discuss alternatives like, okay, can you join 10 minutes later? Or is it enough to push it 1 hour? Can you squeeze it into half an hour discussion rather than a whole hour discussion? We then create a new contract, and that new contract becomes binding. Like one of the nice examples I like to give, if we decided to meet next Monday at 11 o'clock, and then you call me and say, okay, let's meet at 5 o'clock. But then I show up at 5 o'clock and 1 minute. Am I late 1 minute or 6 hours and 1 minute? If I'm late 6 hours and 1 minute, that's a deviation, right? I didn't tell you anything. Suddenly at 5:01, I show up where you expected the meeting to happen at 11. Whereas if we discussed it and said, okay, it's going to be 5, and I show up 5:01, I'm late 1 minute, not 6 hours and 1 minute. I hope that makes sense about the difference between deviation and change. So this is what I like to call calibrated plans. To keep calibrating the plan to the needs and out of negotiation, it's an endless discussion about meeting time, meeting budget, meeting expectations, meeting outcomes, not just time and money alone, to make sure that the why, the main reason that we started this journey together is still preserved. That usually we don't want to change. I'll stop here.
All right.
Okay,
Thanks
so this
a lot.
is the last slide if you have any questions before I go into it.
Team open, speak up. I have, none of you are unmuted by me. So thanks a lot, Robert, for this session. If you have any queries or questions, please do put it up here. Just speak out.
So, sorry, I mean, this is the last slide. That wasn't the last slide.
Okay, sorry.
But I wanted to stop to see if anyone has any comment or want to ask something.
Got it.
Okay, so some of the winning approaches you can adopt. And this, again, starts by observing where are you at now, what's happening with your teams, and what do you want to improve. So just following from the previous example is what I like to call snowballs. There are good snowballs and there are bad snowballs, if you want. I like the snowball analogy because you put a little bit of snow at the top of the mountain and you leave it. And the more you leave it, the more momentum it gets and the bigger it gets. And also the harder it is to stop. They grow fast and harder as you go. So you want to stop snowballs before they slap you in the face or just consume you. And that's where disruptive behaviors and disruptive communications and disruptive deviations can really kill a product or even a company. Maybe one of the most fascinating stories about it is it was put in a movie in the 90s. It was called Rogue Trader. Basically, it was about the bankruptcy of the Barings Bank in the 90s after finding $1 billion deficiency within 1 year. It was a broker for investments who decided to play on the side with people's money, unfortunately. So they started taking money from clients, investing them in wrong investments, if you want, and then loses. So rather than admit loss, he created a fiction account and started putting the losses there as if there was an account that keeps making investments and losing, but it was his account of deficiency. So the company didn't see this until the audit at the end of the year. So within 1 year, he could accumulate over $1 billion losses. And then at the Christmas party audit, this thing was, I mean, it's certainly not a funny story. The whole bank went bankrupt just by this one action of a snowball, if you want. This is obviously an extreme, but snowballs can consume projects very quickly. And that's where you get the harsh reality of $2 trillion losses, for example. Some winning approaches, lead with questions, not answers. I know this could sound like a cliche, and there are lots of kinds of questions. You could have blame questions. Why did you do that? Why didn't you do it that way? That's not the question types I'm talking about. It's what I like to call the why questions, really the good why questions, like try to understand the why of the other person, not fulfill your why question. Why do they want it this way? Why do they prefer that color? What's behind, why do they want this kind of budget and not another budget? You'll find fascinating things happening. And usually in project management, this is called hidden agendas, which is really a synonym of not asking questions, really. If you ask the questions, you will probably find the agendas and they're not hidden anymore. Autopsies. I mean, it's a bit late, but it's certainly better than nothing. And Agile adopted the idea of autopsies into retrospectives. So you do it every sprint. So you learn on the go as well, not just at the end of the project. I conducted dozens of autopsies after product finished. And usually they can come with a price if the organization is not used to them and to good open discussion environment, because people think somebody is looking for someone to blame and they don't want to participate. And it's really important to create the atmosphere for it so that people really try to find what happened. And in one extreme case, in a project that happened in one of the companies I worked with, there was a dispute between two managers, and one manager thought, one of them was the project management manager, and another was the technical team, like the R&D VP. They didn't see eye to eye, and then one of them said, you know what, you give it to your team, I'm not going to be involved at all, and you just run alone. And with the heat of the discussion from both sides, they agreed. So the technical team went on without any project management support, feeling that, okay, why do we need them? And others looking at the side, seeing the snowball growing and not saying anything, until it erupted when the CEO knew that there's a problem and everyone got a shower of not so good compliments, let's put it that way, and go back to the drawing board and delaying the product by at least 9 months, just because the environment didn't allow any better discussion. But then hiding this without any proper autopsy and not learning from it for the next time, that will be even horrible to move on, because it will just keep repeating. Maybe even after this dispute, it'll be even harsher to do it right the next time. It will be even worse. And maybe this goes without saying, but it's really important, get everyone better. I mentioned the underperforming teams before. So it means people should really be on the top of their game. Whether they are technical people, they should know how to do their things. Whether they are an agile team and get the best of their agile practices, whether they are managers and know the best of their management practices. When everyone's trying to get better, the communications also opens better, because, but again, there's that. It could be disrupted by someone thinking, if I know better than you, then I'm better than you. And I don't want to collaborate with you anymore. So just watch it while you do that. Okay, I'll stop here and leave it to you guys if you have any open questions.
Why don't we have another 10 minutes? Feel free to unmute yourself. I know that Brendan had a question and a couple of people had questions. Let's just open the forum for questions.
My question was, and I think you answered it, Robert, was what examples have you got for of snowballing when you kind of gave that answer in that last one, in terms of where two teams weren't aligning and suddenly it just got worse and worse and worse till it all blew up.
But if you got other examples, we can talk about it.
Have you got other examples of snowballs you've seen sort of where something's sort of started relatively small and innocuous, and then over time it's become part of a negative culture, if you like, and then blown up?
Every time you have a missed deadline, it's probably a snowball. There's a snowball behind it. For example, nobody thought about putting an integration machine, and there's no server to put the release executable on it, right? So then everyone's working, checking things in, and then suddenly they try to integrate in the last moment, and then suddenly it's not working, and then suddenly they try to fix it, and then everyone is late at night or the whole weekend, and then the whole thing is pushed. But it started 6 months ago or a year ago when the plan was put and nobody said we should invest in an integration server. So that was the beginning of that small snowball.
Yeah. And I like the one about, the team members not getting on. And I would think, the best, that's going to snowball until those team members blow up, and, it could get worse and worse, or they just part ways. And an easy way of remediating that is just get those people to understand what their differences are. And if you're one of those parties, have that conversation with the other person and go, look, you know what, we disagree on stuff, but we've got to bury the hatchet, because if we don't, it's going to be bad for everybody.
I agree. And, when I was doing mostly project management work, I would tell, friends that have no technical background or whatsoever, like, what do I do? And I say, I'm a nanny for engineers and managers. Because unfortunately, many times it ends up there. Just being in kindergarten, and you go to that corner, and you go to that corner, and we'll talk tomorrow. But what you say is important. Like, sometimes we see those disputes, and sometimes they even erupt in an office. And then nobody says anything. And I took it as a habit that I wouldn't allow this with teams I work in. So I would see a dispute in the corner of my eye, or even someone tells me about what happened yesterday when I wasn't in the office. And then first thing in the morning, I'll take those two guys into a room and say, look, I understand you're all brilliant in whatever you do, but let's resolve this. And I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a therapist if you want, but I really want everyone to do their best and collaborate in their best. So let's see what's behind this. And sometimes it's because this guy is late for my meeting, and that guy gave me something without proper documentation and then disappeared. And okay, then how can we improve it the next time? And we have the tools. I mean, especially if you're working agile, you have the tools like retrospective. But again, if the approach is not there, if the willingness to open up and there is no one allowing this openness, then it wouldn't happen. Everyone would say, oh, this is not for the retrospective. We'll say the easy stuff. We'll say the obvious stuff, not the nitty-gritty, oily, problematic stuff.
I mean, you've got to create that environment of trust where people can actually be honest and not feel like, to somebody else's other point, that they are going to get shot down for being honest. Obviously.
And I cannot tell you about the many times that I went to a developer or even a technician or whatever and apologized because I missed something. And I said, whatever happened yesterday, I know I should have behaved differently. This is how I think I should behave next time. And I still appreciate whatever you're doing. And if I have any comment, this is it. And let's take it from there and not just leave it as I'm the manager, he's not, and stuff it. Sorry to put it that way.
Yeah. Because I think it's interesting, your matrix at the start is, why are teams not in that top right quadrant? Why aren't they? There's a reason, and understanding that reason is often, I think, critical to being able to get into that top quarter. Because often teams are siloed because the bureaucracy's made them like that, but then also the bureaucracy's pandered to personalities.
Yes. And that's why I put on the axis, I don't know if you noticed, the breadth of communication and the depth of communication. These really are the things that are behind it. And yes, it takes sometimes, again, I think that's what differentiates, there's this whole big discussion about the difference between leadership and management. And then in my dictionary, management is a role. Someone gives you something here saying, you're the manager now. It's a function that someone else defined for you. Leadership, on the other hand, it really comes from the inside out rather than the other way. You could be the manager and the leader. You could be not the manager and the leader. It's up to you. And that's where you start leading by example, really, because you are a leader. I remember, for example, one time, actually between those two managers I mentioned earlier, where I went to the VP R&D, I said, that manager was yelling about his employee, threatening them to be fired because they did a lousy job. And whatever the dispute is, I don't think that's the proper way or the proper environment to create in the department. Now, I'm not even remotely connected to this incident. It doesn't affect me in any way. That person wasn't on my team. Those managers are not managing me. Still, I didn't think it's okay to leave it on or go and gossip about it to someone else. Just directly to the source, go and do something. Sakti, you're muted. We can't hear you.
You had to somebody.
Speaking of communication.
He's very passionate.
I'm not sure whether he is on this meetup or another one.
You think maybe it's someone else?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So just ignore him. So if probably he's not involved in this one, then it's okay. So before I would like to request everyone if they can open their videos up a bit for a minute so that we can take a pic. That would be great. Yeah. Thanks, Isabel, Rajneesh. Who else? We still are waiting for Craig. If you can do that, that would be great. Just open up your one.
Craig mentioned he camera is having some issues. All good.
Oh, okay. Hey, there you go. You're back. Okay, just give me a minute. Just setting up the photo. So cheers, everyone.
Cheers.
Thank you. One more. I'll just take one for the house.
And
all right. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. So we'll keep this session open for any of you who wants to continue chatting with Robert if you have the time.
Yeah,
and maybe it's good to stop recording.
I will stop the recording right now. Yeah.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Isabel, really curious